What is up everyone, it's Saber here and welcome to another Naruto What If you end up liking the video, please consider subscribing. It's free and you can take it back at any time and it really helps me out, and this is my main channel, so if you're interested in what if Naruto had the DNA of every member of the Akatsuki, or what if Naruto was neglected and joined the Straw Hat Pirates, go check out my main channel. And with all of the YouTube formalities out of the way, let's get into it. The Genins shuffled into the wide open arena, bedraggled, worn, and generally looking much worse for the wear. Of course there are, like most things, exceptions, such as the lone team from Suna, who appeared to have bore no signs of injury, not even of combat for that matter. The Konoha team, led by one Yakushi Kabuto, also seemed relatively unscathed in comparison with their less fortunate brethrens, who all showed evidence of struggle and violence. None of the Genins, however, paid much attention to their surrounding, not even that obscure statue of the massive hands locked in a seal. They whispered amongst themselves even as they filled the chamber, speaking in hushed voices about the supernatural event which they witnessed a few days ago. It wasn't every day, after all, that a miniature sun erupts in a hidden village. No official explanation have been offered of the otherworldly radiance, which only served to amplify the rumors already spreading not only between Genins but in a circle of Jonins and Chunins as well. Everything from the development of AS+ rank jutsu to UFO conspiracy were suggested in the course of the 3 days following the blinding flash, and one must keep in mind those were just the reasonable ones. One rather lunatic individual, who is currently enjoying the hospitality of Konoha Mental Institution, had even gone so far as to proclaim the light is in fact the byproduct of the denotation of a nuclear warhead created in one of the secret facilities Fire Country established near Konoha in an attempt to develop a super weapon capable of annihilating entire cities due to a physic process known only as nuclear fission. This particular individual also mentioned such non-existent events as non-proliferation treaty and arms control. Needless to say, no one believed a single word of it. Of course, later in history most scholars tended to attribute such blatant regard as simple ignorance. No one at the time understood a single word the man uttered. All anyone knows is that the name Einstein was tossed around a lot, but for now the higher-ups of Konoha are keeping silent concerning the whole ordeal. However, unlike certain other governmental conspiracies, this time the Hidden Leaf weren't to blame, because this time they knew no more about the explosion of brilliance than your average 3 years old. The only one who actually witnessed the occurrence first-handed, namely Sakura, Sasuke, and Anko, had no idea what it was about. All they could tell the Hokage was that for some freakish reason Naruto was involved, and as far as the old man knew, getting Naruto to reveal information he already declined to offer is no easier than convince Orochimaru to not only accept redemption but to do in a pink tutu. Speaking of Naruto, the boy had looked like he's been through hell when Anko first brought him to the infirmary of Kanahagakura's entire body was covered with blood, much of his skin missing. They were, upon later inspections, not so much as ripped off as burned away by some incomprehensible force. The doctor, upon first examination, almost hurled the content of his lunch into one of the nearby garbage bin. When the poor physician had sufficiently recovered, he informed the Hokage gravely that the boy would require years of hospitalization. He was still picking up his jaw from the floor when Naruto emerged the next day, completely healed to the point that if not inspected closely, it would have been impossible to tell where his new skin began. But the boy, no matter how hard he tried to hide it, was changed. An alteration noted by both Anko and the Hokage. Naruto, having emerged from the incident, seemed to be surrounded with an aura of power, not the subtle strength the young man once held, but sheer power, threatening to engulf all that beheld its majesty. It was power that seemed to be barely contained, incredible chakra that would spill over at the slightest provocation. The Hokage had asked Hayashi to examine the boy, knowing the strength of his Byakugan surpassed all other Hyugas, and so the best judge of Naruto's condition, Sarutobi, had expected the proud man to protest or even to scorn at the idea of utilizing his precious gift as a medical tool. To say the Hokage was surprised by Hayashi's reaction would be a gross understatement. Somehow, by the jest of some trickster god, Hayashi, Hyuga man who looked as though the world owed him money, rushed over to the hospital. Upon hearing the news, yes, rushed, not walked, not even ran, he rushed. The Hokage at the sight made a mental note to up his medication. What made the encounter even more astounding was the fact that after a cursory examination, Hayashi had asked for a moment of reprieve, citing mental and physical exhaustion. It was like staring into the sun. The head of the Hyuga clan had muttered, rubbing his temple to dull the throb. My eyes are still hurting. However, both men came to the eventual agreement that whatever happened to Naruto, it would only prove to be beneficial to the well-being of Kanahagakure. especially against the nameless terror that still lurked beyond its walls. After all, Naruto for all intent and purpose seemed, after the episode, less human and more of a force of nature, an exceedingly destructive force of nature, not unlike a concentrated level 9 disaster actually, which is why at this moment Uzumaki Naruto stood beside the aging Hokage staring at the assembled genins gathered before him. With a frown, there are some rather familiar faces in the group as far as he recalled the teams. Of those two, Jonin he had rescued a while back and Kakashi's team stood out particularly vivid in his memory. However, he also noted the blonde girl he had met a few days ago at the ramen stand, a massive fan strapped on her back. She was standing with what Naruto could only assume as her team, a black-clothed boy wearing full decorative makeup and a red-haired boy carrying a massive gourd, the kanji for love tattooed on his forehead. There was something about the boy that was different from the rest of the genins. It might have been his mana reserve, larger than what Naruto had seen in a great many humans, more than even certain jonins if his eyes were to be believed, but it was more than the mana which drew Naruto's attention. No, it was the look in the boy's jade eyes, a near disdain for those around him, a cold light that flashed across his eyes whenever they rested upon some nameless genin. It was the eyes of a killer to whom human life meant nothing. It was the eyes of an angel of death. Naruto knew that look all too well. He had seen it whenever he looked into the mirror every morning, but unlike his void-like orbs, that red-haired boy still held emotion in his gaze, a deep hatred and contempt for all things living perhaps, but emotions nonetheless. Sometimes Naruto could not help but wish he too may express emotions with such carelessness and ease. Still, envy aside, Naruto would have pitied the bastard who went up against the red hair, if he could have felt pity that his War 1010 echoed in disbelief. She had, upon entering the second examination, felt that something was off. The Chunin exam was nothing like how it had been advertised, a friendly competition between the allied nations. After all, if the true goal of the exam was imply a measurement of their genin skills, would it not have been wiser if a test of fewer casualties was employed? Surely each nation would want as many Chunins as possible instead of pitting potential shinobis in a meaningless slaughter feast against one another. But at the Hokage's explanation she understood, and that knowledge sickened her. So that was the purpose to this little exam, the purpose behind the bloodshed and the death dealt by those who in some cultures were still considered children. The shinobis are warriors, killers, bred and taught. Each swing of kunai, each toss of shuriken they underwent during the academy, and even under their own senseis, were in truth not exercises at all. Each action was meant for a human being to be on the receiving end. Each strike meant to turn the innocent into cold-blooded killers. Yet such militaristic and warlike society have its consequences, as demonstrated by the various skirmish fought in shinobi history, for with each kill there rose new aggressions and new enmities amongst the villages, which given time evolves to open hostility. Such pent-up frustration, such enclosed rage, hatred and pride would in time erupt, leading to massive conflicts of interest, and resulting more often than not in war. 1010 was well versed, thanks to her father, a weapon master and an avid scholar in the Third Secret Ninja War. She knew well the devastation it caused both economically and politically to the hidden villages. She knew the casualties each side suffered, the impossibly long list of names that commemorated the fallen. She learned by heart the various depressions the participating villages endured in the aftermath, as well as the dissension and insurgents within the areas. Suffice to say, the Third Secret War had left the world in ruins, and with such despairing results even on the victor's side, it was small wonder why the various hidden villages were so averse to a fourth war. True, the Iwa's recent action may be deemed an act of aggression against the Leaf, but even they did not venture so far as to propose an open declaration of war, but to resort to such extremes. 1010 bit back a bitter laugh as she listened to the Hokage explain the other reasons the exam was held, the aristocratic audiences, the possible effect on missions, and such like. A pack of empty words, she thought with barely suppressed anger. She had seen through the farce all too well to be fooled. In the end, the role of the genins in this exam are simple. They are nothing more than lambs led to a slaughter in order to dissipate the violent bloodthirst that had accumulated in the village. It truly was a war to end all war, a war to sate the warmongering villages, a war fought without consequence of vile tradition. Indeed, then, with a soft shake of her head, the pink shirt girl looked up, a determined light shining in her eyes. She was a shinobi. She did not question her orders. If this is a war and she Konoha's soldier, then she would do her utmost to survive regardless of the obstacles. If she was to become like her idol, the legendary Tsunade-sama, then she would start by becoming a true shinobi before the third examination can begin. You are expected to undergo a series of preliminary matches in order to reduce your number. Naruto informed the gathered group, donned his ever so familiar black cloak. As he said this, he surveyed the assembly, his eyes a strange swirl of blue and green radiance, an alien light that made the boy all the more intimidating. Those who feel inadequately prepared may choose to forfeit the match now. Any questions? There were none. Half of the genins were scared stiff by the cold glare and the other half having actually witnessed some extent of the boy's power knew better than to open their mouth. So in silence Kabuto raised his hand. It was time for him to leave. Examiner, I would like to withdraw. Naruto frowned as he stared at Kabuto's penetrating gaze, making the latter squirm uncomfortably. The blonde nodded, at last releasing the silver-haired medic /spy from his predicament. Very well, you may leave. Kabuto returned gesture and appreciation, turned and left the building. Although if one were to observe closely they might just notice that the so-called genin had traveled a little faster than was necessary. That was close. The bespectacled young man breathed a sigh of relief as he felt the doors close behind him. He had almost allowed the old blood in him to awaken. Not good, especially since he had the uneasy feeling that if he was allowed to return to his old self that strange proctor would have destroyed him, with all the ease of a man crushing an insect between his fingers. I don't think he saw through me yet. Besides, my service is no longer needed for now since you are watching personally, right? Orochimaru. Poor Kabuto, if he only realized that the sound Jonin in question was not the missing Nin but only a mud clone, and that the real Orochimaru is at this moment in some unmentionable place trying to cope with the unearthly pain the Mako had inflicted upon his body. Fate is truly an ironic lady. The board lit up as names flashed across the screen in rapid successions. Genins alike held their respective breath as they waited for the digital configurations that would decide their fate. Needless to say, whoever paired up with Gaara is utterly and completely screwed, but most of them don't know that yet, and even if they do, half of them are too stubborn and or stupid to know when to call quits. It was a trait, ironically enough, that saved Konohagakure no Sato's asses many a time in the past. Fortunately, Gaara was not the first to go. Instead, the two names printed across the electronic board, blinking dumbly back at the assembled congregation, happened to be none other than one Uchiha Sasuke and one Akato Yoroi. The decision having been made, the rest of the genins and the gathered jonins filed up into the stands high above the arena, where they may watch in relative comfort as below them ninja wannabes pounded the living crap, literally in some cases, out of each other. The rookie nines and guys team took one side while the sand team, along with a number of teams from other villages, took the other. Hey, who do you think is going to win? Kiba asked as he looked down with interest at the two combatants. He had heard some impressive things about the Uchiha genius, although that was never proven, but still the dog user figured that even the most obscure myths had their roots grounded in facts. Certainly the survivor of the massacre was a bastard, but it does not change the fact that he was also very skilled. It would be beneficial if he could use the Uchiha boy's talent to gauge his own. I have my money on that Uchiha bastard. Ignoring Ino and Sakuras bristled at the insulting way the dog boy addressed their precious Sasuke. Shino took up the reply. He too was focused on the match. It would do much good if he could learn from the battle of others. After all, as a shinobi there's always room for improvement. Presumably the victory would go to Sasuke. Sanli too stared down at the raven-haired teen with a thoughtful look on his face. Let us see. Your genius really is Sasuke-kun. I will prove my hard work can overcome any genius. Naruto down below glanced at each of the fighters, then with a curt nod raised his hand high into the air, signaling the beginning of the first match. Kaisher, begin. The match went quicker than expected. Sasuke, caught by surprise at Yoroi's strange technique, had fared badly in the beginning, but such disadvantage was only temporary. Once the boy had gained his footing and unleashed his Sharingan, it became next to impossible for the sound spy to land a blow. Deciding that he should keep his various jutsus as hidden aces, Sasuke instead met the man in hand-to-hand combat, taking care to avoid the draining touch, and finished the genin off with his Rindan lion combo. The act impressed a number of people, especially those who had knowledge of the Konoha Reppu Leaf Whirlwind, the technique from which the Rindan derives. It took more than mere copycat to perform and even alter such moves. Despite his fault, Sasuke was truly a genius, but mere imitations will not get that boy through the test. Guy, who had watched in silence all the while, stroked his chin thoughtfully as he looked over to where Kakashi stood. I hope you have taught him more than that. My eternal rival, or Lee, will destroy him should they ever meet. Shino frowned at his opponent. It was going to be a difficult battle. He had surmised from the previous two attacks that his foe utilized the airwaves as a weapon, expelling them forcefully through the air ducts in his hands to cause incredible damage to his enemies caught in their blasts. So far Shino was able to keep the boy Zaku at bay, but he could do no further. The sound genin was a cautious one, blasting away a swarm of insects whenever they skittered to close. If only those air holes could be plugged up, then Shino would attain an easy victory, but to do that the bug user would need a distraction. Without warning, several kunai flew towards Zaku, who laughed loudly and blasted them away. Come on, you can do better than. His voice was silenced when Shino charged towards the boy, another kunai clutched in his hand. The silent youth had almost managed to reach striking distances before Zaku blasted the genin away with another palm full of air. Shino, with a surprised look on his face, dissolved into a swarm of black insects, revealing a second Shino hidden behind the first. What? Zaku gasped in alarm. Before he could even finish, Shino was upon him, a kunai spinning between his fingers. Another explosion shook the field, smoke enveloping the spot where the two had stood. There was a moment of silence, and then Zaku emerged from the wreckage, his clothing in pieces. That was close, Zaku thought grimly as he looked back over where the insect user had been. The sound genin, having no choice left at Shino's sudden assault, had launched a Zankaha, decapitating air wave at his opponent. Unfortunately, due to their proximity, he too was caught in the discharge. As for that Shino kid, Zaku would be amazed if the brat even walked after this. When the smoke was cleared, however, no Shino could be found. All that remained of his body was a few bugs crawling around the crevices of the shattered tiles. Damn, Zaku swore loudly as he looked around wildly for any sign of the insect master. It had been a second clone, which means that all this time the real Shino was out here somewhere plotting. What was the bug boy thinking? You look confused behind Zaku, a voice chuckled. But my bugs have done as they are supposed to. I have won this battle. What are you talking about? Zaku sneered as he wheeled to face his opponent, an arm raised before him in defense. I could blast you away right now. Try it. Shino chuckled again, amused by Zaku's action. I wouldn't advise it though if you know what's good for you. Zaku did not heed the warning, and the result is to be expected. Chakra flared up around his arms, puncture skin and flesh in its need for release. Zaku screamed long and hard, the pain lacing through his appendages, overwhelming his senses. Then, with one last cry, fell unconscious where he stood. Shino looked down at the boy's crumpled form without pity. It was a gamble as planned, but it had paid off. While Zaku had managed to scatter his second clone, a few destruction bugs managed to sneak into the tube seconds after the destructive air wave left their confines. Such action required pinpoint accuracy and precise timing, a feat Shino managed with some difficulty and some luck, but in the end, it was for the better that Zaku person was defeated by his own technique, and judging by his condition had suffered hell through it all. You play too much, Gaara growled as Kankuro returned to the stand, the dummy firmly wrapped in layers of bandages. The red-haired youth did not seem pleased at all that his brother had made quick work of his opponent, the strange and disturbing shinobi Masumi Tsurugi. We did not come here for fun and games. Kankuro nodded sheepishly and did not meet Gaara's eyes. Not surprising, almost no one could stare into those murderous windows for too long. Gaara simply had that effect on people, thanks on no small part to the demon he harbored. Sorry Gaara, I won't do it again, promised the gourd user. Took one calculating look at the puppet wielder, then nodded, his gaze turning back to the field below. That black-cloaked examiner, something is wrong about him. Whenever the redhead's vision lingered on the youth, his instinct screamed for him to turn away. It took every ounce of his willpower to stay his eyes. Such phenomenon has never before occurred. Gaara did not understand it. Why did such icy terror grip his heart when he beheld the sight of that boy? Why, when that blonde's gaze focused on him, did his own Biju react with such excitement? Excitement rooted in fright. Why, for the first time, Gaara could not work up his killing instinct. Why instead did he feel such an urge to flee? Gaara could not explain it, but for the first time since this journey began, he doubted their chances not at a victory against the Konohan forces, but their own chances of survival. It was alien territory that Gaara never again wished to tread, and so with great difficulty he directed his focus elsewhere. Shikamaru shook his head as he and the others laid the two unconscious girls next to one another against the wall. The two former best friends had, after exhausting all their jutsus, knocked each other out with a rather unimpressive punch. Needless to say, the match was not very exciting. Perhaps in a different dimension, in a different media, the girls' fight might have been important, punctuated with visible flashbacks to narrate the tragedy that has befallen their bond and shed some light on the characters' past as well as illustrate their development. Unfortunately, nobody in the stand could actually see the thoughts and memories that flashed through the girls' minds, and so dismissed the match as yet another example of male shinobi superiority. Well, at least those two won't be at each other's throat anymore, having spent their rage and frustration down below. Shikamaru shook his head. That would be something to see, wouldn't it? Although for some reason the lazy Nara had trouble visualizing such miracles. Some things are just not meant to change. Temari frowned as she landed on the stone floor. Originally she had planned on teaching her foe a painful lesson, but that changed upon seeing Naruto. It simply wouldn't do for her to ruin her image in front of a prospective crush. Now would it? Narrowing her eyes, Temari followed the movement of the bun-haired girl, musing at the female genin's good fortune. It would seem you would walk away in one piece, little girl, she thought with a vicious smile. As the match began, Tenten shot several kunais towards The blonde-haired girl, all of which scattered harmless to the floor. The weapon mistress's eyes widened in surprise. She missed. That was impossible. She never misses. After all, she was able to hit 100 out of 100 target every time, which could only mean one thing: she was forced to miss. But how it wasn't long before she was able to deduce the cause of her fault. Well, then the girl thought grimly as she reached for a scroll. I'll have to make sure she can't deflect them all. Then with that thought, Tenten pulled out the scroll and leapt high into the air, the fabric of the tome unraveling and spiraling around her as she began spinning at a high speed, soon lost within a blurring whirlwind of red and pale yellow. One by one, weapons of various designs and fatality appeared around the spinning genin, who launched them one after the other towards the smirking wind mistress below. A normal person would have been skewered alive by the barrage of weaponries, but Tamari was no ordinary girl. With rapid movement, she pulled out her massive fan and swung it before her, arousing a violent wind that blew away the coming projectiles. Steel clattered uselessly to the floor, their path intercepted by the unnatural gust of air. My weapons, Tenten gasped as she landed with the empty parchment. Was there some trick to that fan? Impossible. This is the first start. Tamari grinned as she revealed the massive fan, a single purple circle showing upon its folds. When you see the third, you will lose. What followed was a one-sided massacre. Tenten, in a final attempt, performed the Sashoryu, twin rising dragons technique. Hundreds upon thousands of shinobi tools rained down upon the sand kunoichi, who blasted them away with ease, revealing the second of 3 stars painted upon her fan. Even with her final effort, manipulating the lifeless tools with chakra-imbued string did not help matters, as Tamari again parted the incoming assault with a wave of her fan, bringing the now fully open weapon behind her. Tamari grinned savagely at her competitor, who had not yet gotten up, completely having been thrown to earth by the biting gale. 3 stars. With that, Tamari of the sand vanished from the stadium. Tenten's eyes widened in surprise at the sudden disappearance of her. Where is she? The weapon mistress wondered as her chocolate eyes scanned the area around her in agitation. Then realization struck her as she spun about just in time to witness Tamari bearing down towards her, hovering upon her enormous fan. Leaping down beside the startled kunoichi, Tamari grabbed the sailing apparatus and waved it twice back and forth. Kamitashi, cutting whirlwind, she shouted aloud, sending a massive tornado towards the surprised Konoha genin. Caught within the painful jutsu, Tenten found herself propelled high into the air, the savage winds cutting into her clothing and exposed flesh, drawing blood. It seemed like an eternity before the gale finally subsided and the brown-haired girl sped back towards the earth below. Tamari had briefly considered placing her now folded fan below the fallen kunoichi just as an act of malice. Then, with a rather shy glance towards the blood proctor, decided against such cruel act. She had an impression to make. After all, Tenten braced herself for the impact against the hard granite stone floor, but such moment never came. Instead, a pair of arms, powerful and firm, broke her fall, and the next thing she knew, she found herself being carried bridal style, snuggled against the chest of that rather familiar-looking proctor. To say Tenten, having gained aware of the situation, was embarrassed would be akin to saying the earth is round. Winner. Tamari, after allowing Tenten to stand by herself, she was still a little shaky on her feet. That last attack had done some serious damage, it would seem. Naruto declared the victor in the same flat voice he almost always employed. The blonde did not seem to notice at this moment. The said victor was not very happy at all. In fact, if looks could kill, Team Guy had best began on a eulogy for their female member right now. Kakashi gaped. Did his eyes deceive him, or did Naruto of all people actually catch that Tenten girl in mid-fall? How such an illogical thing could have happened? How could something so utterly defying reason have occurred? It was impossible. No matter how many times the scene played out in his mind, the son of the White Fang refused to heed the information his ocular organ is feeding his brain. He must be dreaming to ensure that he is not hallucinating. The silver-haired Jonin calmly pulled out his precious Ika Paradise and hugged it disturbingly close to his cheek as his skin rubbed against the smooth cover of the perverted book. Kakashi came to the realization that he was not in fact dreaming, and what he had just witnessed did indeed occur. Upon the realization, Kakashi buried his nose in the orange book, attempting to deal with the sudden paradigm shift of his little world. The rest of the Jonin elites, needless to say, is sufficiently perturbed by the scene. Sandame Okage shook his head at the display of one of his best subordinates. Was it just Kakashi, or was all skilled shinobis touched in the head? Anko Asuma Kakashi. Oh, the list could go on forever. Of course, the elderly man had to admit that maybe, just maybe, Naruto took his request of looking out for the Konoha rookies a little too seriously. Oh well, as long as the boy didn't step over any obscure boundary, he's perfectly fine. The next 3 Matches ended in rapid succession without much to be noted. Shikamaru, relying on his brain, had managed to outwit the sound Ninkintsuchi. Unlike the previous fights, neither of the two sustained any serious injuries aside from a few cuts and needle wounds. Shikamaru felt fine, and the worst of Kin's wound is nothing more than a minor concussion that might leave her with a headache. Hinata's match surprisingly was against her own teammate Kiba. To everyone's surprise, however, it was the soft-spoken girl that ultimately emerged as the victor of the confrontation. While Kiba's attacks are wild and ferocious, they are also unrefined and rough around the edges. On the other hand, Hinata, while lacking in confidence, was still trained by one of the best, and regardless how much of a failure she may be, her attacks are still that of a Hyuga's. Of course, the reluctance of the dog boy to attack the white-eyed girl might also have influenced the outcome of the match. Regardless, Kiba emerged from the confrontation battered, bruised, and in serious doubt about his masculinity. He was also forced to endure several good-natured teases, all of which focused on the fact that not only did he got his butt kicked by a kunoichi, but Hinata no less. Kiba did not feel any better about his loss. Surprisingly, the last match was almost pitiful to watch. Pitting Nazo Maki against someone like Niji Hyuga was simply destined for trouble. Most of the match was consisted of Nazo hurling various insults at the branch house member, who calmly ignored the jeering and taunts before blasting Nazo with a good hack Rokujian Sho, gentle fist 8 trigrams 64 palms. Because the idiot was foolish enough to step into the young prodigy's field of divination. Oddly enough, nobody confronted Niji about the reason for his extreme actions. Then again, Nazo was getting on everyone's nerves, so their apathy at his plight is understandable. Besides, the little bugger is alive, isn't he? No need to exaggerate an incident any larger than it really is. Naruto watched slightly impressed as the boy opened his fourth gate. The chakra he emitted was much greater than what it once had been. However, such unnatural power came at high costs. According to the QB, who even now fed the blonde information, the cellular activities within the spandex boy's body increased exponentially. The cells formed, produced, and divided at a rapid rate, supplying a far greater quantity of energy to the body than it was normal. But on the other hand, the cells died that much faster as well. In fact, the boy was literally burning up. There were only so many cells one could go through before one's body succumbs to the stress, and with the opening of the chakra gates, Rock Lee had shortened his existence with every passing second, but the effect was awe-inspiring, at least to most of the watchers. The ground below the eyebrow Genin split beneath his inhuman speed as the green-clad youth charged towards the sand user. Gaara of the desert had barely time to blink before a leg connected with his chin, cracking his so-called impenetrable armor of the sand and sending the boy flying upward. The beating was not over. Gaara had scarcely time to comprehend what had just occurred, scarcely time even to fall, before Rock Lee appeared on top of him in a blur of colors and sent the container of the one-tailed Shikaku pummeling towards the already shattered floor below. The sand could not even keep up with the intensity of the battle. Rock Lee vanished from his spot and appeared below Gaara, and with another bone-crushing blow propelled Gaara into the air once more. Back and forth he went, his form barely visible even to the most trained eyes. Rock Lee struck the Jinchuriki from all directions, launching the sand nin this way and that across the open air. Each blow was met with further cracks in the armor, each kick sending more pieces of the male down to earth. At last it was time. With that single thought, Lee opened his fifth gate with even higher speed that made the boy almost invisible to the naked eye. Lee crashed into Gaara, sending him down towards the earth at extreme velocity. Gaara's eyes opened for the second time in fear as he felt his movement came to a sudden halt. Looking up, he noticed that Lee held in his left hand a white bandage, the other end of which was wrapped firmly around his own waist. This is the final move, Lee's mind screamed as he pulled back his right hand and leg in preparation for his most devastating arsenal. Gai Sensei Niji, this is my shinobi way, this is my cry of defiance against my destiny. A single thought echoed through the boy's mind as he pulled Gaara towards him and felt his appendages making impact. The driving force behind the brutal attack annihilated the entire floor, creating a massive crater upon the already scarred arena. A blast of smoke erupted from where the two had landed, covering the stadium and obscuring the audience's view. Jonin and Genin alike shielded their faces from the sudden rush of debris and sought desperately to keep their eyes open in order to witness the result of such an intense match. This is the end. And yet when the area was cleared, Gaara lay silently in the center of the chamber, his breath labored and rugged, but nonetheless he was conscious and murderous at the last second. His gourd reverted into sand and absorbed a great deal of the force, and even then Gaara could barely feel his body. Vein crept into his eyes. This Rock Lee will die slowly. He raised a hand, sand spilling from his side, and advanced upon a barely conscious Lee who struggled to put more distance between himself and the homicidal sand Genin, but without warning the sand collapsed, particles of gravel and silt trickling to the ground. Gaara's face twisted in shock. Something had not only interrupted his attack, it had severed for that brief moment his connection with the sand, how could this be? Nothing could have disrupted his control, absolutely nothing. Turning his head wildly, he saw the proctor at the edge of the floor. The youth did not seem to have moved a single muscle, and yet his eyes flashed in warning. Gaara felt a coldness descending down his spine as he met those gazes, so like his own and so different. It was the eyes of a murderer, but one whose body count far exceeded his own. Gaara knew that look all too well, but unlike his own eyes, there was no madness to the boy's cerulean blue, only a deep calmness that was frightening. There was no desire, no hatred, as there was in his. Gaara killed to rectify his own existence, to prove to himself that no matter how cruel or vicious, there was a reason for his life, a reason why he was brought to this world. Gaara could find no such reason in Naruto's impassive stare. Winter Sabaku no. Gaara with that guy appeared and picked up a barely conscious Lee, and with another explosion of smoke and leaf, headed towards the infirmary. Gaara on the other hand stumbled up the stands and over to where his siblings sat, nervously waiting for their brother to snap. Be careful, that one, Gaara whispered as he sat between them. The two siblings exchanged an uneasy glance at one another. Since when did Gaara give out warnings? It was a long time before Kankuro had the courage to ask, what do you mean, Gaara? Even more surprising, Gaara actually explained his statement rather than snap out at what he perceived to be an idiotic question. That proctor is strong, unimaginably strong. I don't think I can defeat him even if mother is here. Temari felt her jaw hit the floor. Gaara had just admitted that even in his Shikaku state he could not defeat that boy Naruto. How could anyone harbor such power within their frame to stand against even one of the Biju? How could anyone harness such strength as to strike fear into Gaara himself enough that he had willingly admitted his weakness? She turned and stared at Naruto's silent stature, a mixture of fear and admiration in her dark eyes. Could this youth truly save her brother? Temari could only hope. Kankuro adopted a much more conventional reaction and fainted dead away when he was revived. Minutes later he too pulled out a familiar orange book in an effort to preserve his sanity. It would seem Jiraiya's prized work was not so useless after all. Orochimaru cursed as he coughed up more blood, clutching at his heart, which beat with irregular rapidity. The former member of the Akatsuki braced himself against the window of his dimly light room. Even after 3 days of recovery he could barely even stand on his own. The pain was far too overwhelming. It was eating at his body away from the inside. He would need a vessel, and fast. Somewhere in the back of his mind Orochimaru felt an alien sensation prickling against his skin. He had no word to describe such a feeling, but he did not enjoy it one bit. However, had he led a normal life, Orochimaru would have known that such feeling was that of apprehension and fear. He would learn it soon enough. What jest these leafs play, sneered the Tsuchikage, sneered as he tossed the letter into the waste bin. Truly the Hokage of the leaf grew more senile with each passing day. To think such obvious lies could placate the generation-old enmity and hatred the rock harbored for those of the hidden leaf. Did the man believe the Iwa's children to insult their intelligent with this fairy tale demons? Indeed, quite plainly this was yet another underhanded trick the leaf played in order to gain some advantage or other over the village hidden in stone. If that was their plan, then they had best brace themselves for a spectacular failure. Alliance, how preposterous an idea! The people of Awagakure do not forget, nor does their leader the Tsuchikage. At the thought the man reached up and brushed against his left eye. No, he will never forget, even when his ashes are scattered all across the land of the stone of the name of the village that claimed his eye. He will not forget. Ryoma Tsuchikage called out to his assistant, who stood just outside his door. Sure enough, the double oak door swung open and admitted a pale-skinned young man in his late 20s or early 30s. The assistant bowed low as he presented himself before his Kage, then waited patiently for his instruction. The Kage of Rock did not like to be rushed. Take this letter and Leaf's emissary back to Konoha. A sadistic smile stretched across the ruler's face as he spoke his words, soft and full of malice. Let that old fool of theirs know our response. With that he turned his back to Ryoma and focused his sight to the outside, where the corpse of the said messenger hanged lifelessly, dangling from one of the outreaching poles. Perhaps he might consider Orochimaru's offer. After all, unbeknownst to either of the two men, less than 50 miles from the village, hidden in stone, fell shadows stirred ominously. Time skip. Gaara of the desert stared out over the horizon where the night has drew her darkly veil across the heavens. The breeze, cool but not bitingly cold, rustled his blood-red hair, playfully guiding loose strands this way and that in some incomprehensible game. Emerald eyes ringed with dark shadows surveyed the world around him, a world of hostilities and bloodbath. The wind bells that hung from his massive stone structure, that of a large koi fish, chimed softly as the air blew past, a gentle prelude to the massacre that would soon follow. Eyes darkening Gaara turned to the source of disturbance. Quiet footsteps across the wooden roof. It was an alien smell that permeated the air, not the smell of his siblings or his teacher Baki, but the offensive scent of a stranger. Gaara was reminded rather strongly of snakes. He despised snakes. The sand within the gourd of the container stirred in thirst, but it did not strike well from the mist that covered the night air. A voice chuckled sinisterly. It was oddly muffled, as though the speaker worn layers of clothing over his orifice. There was a hint of sneer in the sound as well, something Gaara did not take kindly to. Only a fool sneers at someone like Gaara, and then only the dead fools tells the tale. How surprising it is to find you here. Do you not sleep at all? Green eyes narrowed in annoyance as they focused upon the still chuckling Sannin. It is true what they say, the loud and the weak fall first, and unless Gaara was mistaken, the man standing before him in loose robes was both. He could almost see the idiot's blood mingling with his sand, feel the trickle of the life water escaping droplet by droplet from the mixture of silica and fine granite. How nice of the man to present himself, how nice of him to give Gaara another chance in proving his worth and meaning of existence, and such a pity it was that the dead man did not know when to keep his mouth shut. I was thinking of defeating you right now. Dosa grinned beneath the layers. Gauze, the bandages shifting slightly to accommodate his changing facial features. A murderous light shone darkly in the depth of his eyes as he remembered the instructions given to him. He would not fail his master. He was told by Orochimaru to assassinate Sasuke Uchiha. It seemed a routine mission, killing the last heir of that prestigious clan in order to stir up confusion and chaos within the village premises, while the sound leader himself would lead an attack from without. Unfortunately, due to a certain blonde's interception, he was not able to complete this task. Dosa did not intend to fail the mission, however, and so he sought for another chance. If he could face the Uchiha in the finals, then there was still another shot at his life. Yet one thing stood between him and that brat's life, a certain Sannin named Gaara Sabaku no Gaara. The gourd-carrying shinobi was skilled at this. Dosu had no doubt, having witnessed the titanic showdown between the sand user and Rock Lee, while the boy had taken a ferocious beating from the spandex wearing freak. The fact that he not only survived but seemed to have emerged without any serious injuries seemed to be a testament to his monstrous strength and abilities. But Dosu was confident in his own powers as well, so I'll have a higher possibility of fighting against Sasuke-kun. The sound Genin finished his speech with another soft chuckle, though it did not make it past the bandage mask. Gaara watched the suicidal Genin without much interest. So this one's intention lies within that raven-haired boy. Gaara too had taken notice of the survivor once before when he struck Kankuro with that pebble of his, but his thoughts had long ago abandoned the Uchiha and had focused on another individual, someone whose presence alone could alter everything. The Proctor Uzumaki Naruto. Gaara had only twice doubted his strength. The first time was when he went up against the boy Lee, who had opened 5 of his 8 gates in an attempt for victory. Not only was the boy able to crack the sand armor, but his final attack would have crippled the red-haired demon carrier had he not played his final ace. It took 2 full days for Gaara to completely recover, but compared to the youth called Naruto, the threat Rock Lee posed could only be considered insignificant for reasons Gaara could not explain. That boy was able to strike fear into even the Shikaku himself. For so insane and demonic an entity to taste the bitterness of cowardice, his foe must be dangerous indeed. It wasn't just a feeling either. Prior to their arrival, the Kazekage had received reports of seemingly supernatural events involving the village of Konoha. First, the recruitment of Zabuza, a missing nin, with considerable skill and an ego to boast. How the man was willing to submit to the rule of the leaf was a complete mystery, but rumor has it Momochi has had a run-in with an individual referred to only as the Leaf Saint. Supposedly, according to folk legend, the Leaf Saint was a hero, maybe even a god. The tale was not too clear about this, who was born from amongst the people of fire and inherited a power beyond imagination. It was said during time of trouble the Fire Saint would emerge from his isolation and bring salvation to the people. Such a story was of course far-fetched and clearly propaganda, having only surfaced about a year or two ago. Heavens above, even the title was as cliched and as boring as yesterday's lunch, but nonetheless there was something going on in Konoha, something that made Suna nervous. The second time the Leaf Saint was mentioned was the Stone Massacre, in which a Konoha nin slaughtered over 100 IWA missing nins, all of whom of the rank Chunins and Jonins, while some villages expressed skepticism at the possibility of so powerful an individual. Study of the area indicated that most of the damages were done by a single attack of surreally high chakra red. Incidentally, it was around the time when the information was first released that the number of requests for an alliance with the Leaf doubled. It seemed that the village of the Hidden Leaf has once again reminded the world why it was once called the most powerful village in the elemental nations, and it seemed plain to most people allying with such a village was the wisest Recourse solid proof that the Kazekage was going senile to consort with such slimy creature as Orochimaru. I know of your sand attacks. Dosu grinned as he rolled back the long hanging sleeve of his right arm, revealing the strange hole-filled bracer implanted into his arms that acted as a sound wave conductor. He tapped the hollowed speaker lightly, creating a few humming noises that made the wood beneath his feet tremble. I wonder which is faster, your sand or my sound. Gaara looked down without pity at the brainless man who had so incurred his wrath. The world was so choked full of imbeciles who would throw away their life so hastily, so eagerly, without a moment of pause. However, if this Dosu had indeed grown tired of life, then who was he to tell the man otherwise? Mother hungers for blood, and the sound Nens will do perfectly when there is a full moon. Gaara whispered softly, the madness creeping into his voice. He could hear the screech of the Shikaku within his heart, the ever-present voice that guided his hands, and Sand Mother was growing excited by the minute, and like the good son he was, Gaara did not intend to keep her from her prize. When there is a full moon, his blood pulses with excitement. Dosu could not even speak as he watched the horror unfolding before his eyes. It had not even occurred to his brain to turn and flee as shockwaves of sand tore across the polished lumber, reducing him into nothing but scraps of flesh and blood. Gaara knelt, panting slightly, not at the exhaustion from the attack, but at the effort of pushing the dominating presence of the one-tailed Biju into the recess of his mind where it could not take forceful control of his body. It would be dangerous to unleash the Shikaku here, especially when he is around. Naruto watched the knight with a thoughtful look plastered upon his face. He had sensed, or more precisely the Kyuubi had sensed, something familiar, ancient, but definitely familiar, as though it had hailed from a distant past neither of them could recall, but it was impossible. Of course they were not of this world, having hailed from an entirely different plane of existence. Whatever he had sensed, it was no more than hallucination and illusions, possibly a side effect of the newly awakened materias. After all, they are the condensed memories of the dead. Beside the blonde, the fragile and goddess-like figure of Haku stirred sleepily, causing her flimsy night dress to slip just enough to grant Naruto a teasing peek at what lay underneath. An ordinary man would have had rather interesting reactions at the sight, to say the least, but ordinary does not even begin to describe the flaxen-haired youth, which was why his nose remained stubbornly dry. Porcelain hands reached out and grasped the edge of his shirt, pulling him down to bed. Naruto complied, not wishing to awaken the gentle angel from her slumber. He wasn't quite sure how Haku ended up in his bed, although it has been 3 months since the night Haku arrived in front of his bedroom. Looking frightened out of her wits, Naruto had prior to this been informed by Zabuza that Haku was occasionally haunted by nightmares of her past, but he had not been expecting for the extent of the affliction. The girl looked pale, even more so than usual, and there were red rings around her obsidian eyes, not yet dried of tears. Naruto had begun by trying to calm the still trembling girl down, something he was admittedly terrible at. They had sat down around his personal table and had some short conversations. Naruto could not remember much of anything else afterwards, except for waking up and finding Haku sleeping peacefully next to him, her arms wrapped around his body. God only knows how it developed into a habit. Nowadays Haku's bedroom is nearly abandoned, the girl having moved into his in all but name only. Of course she still used her old room during the days, but in the cool Konoha nights one could always expect her delicate form curled up near the silent figure of Naruto, much like a kitten. Naruto had found that comparison rather accurate. Of course their relationship had remained mostly platonic, save for a few kisses, most of which are accidental and from Haku, and a few awkward moments involving missing garments or embarrassing positions. Well, embarrassing and awkward for poor Haku. At any rate, the girl had a sneaking suspicion that Naruto wouldn't have felt uncomfortable walking down the streets in his birthday suit. Granted, anyone dared commenting on the behavior would have been handed a one-way ticket to hell. However, platonic or not, it still gave Zabuza a heart attack the first time he arrived since the incident. Fortunately, before the man could do any serious damage, a slightly disoriented and sleepy Haku, who had walked out from Naruto's bedroom, managed to separate the pair. After listening to the long-winded explanation, all the while shooting death glares at the innocent boy, Zabuza relented reluctantly. He was really the last one to point any fingers. The experience, though upsetting, nonetheless caused a smile to grace Haku's porcelain face whenever she recalled the incident. It proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that no matter how rough in touch Zabuza-sama had tried to act, deep inside he cared for Haku like his own daughter, the one with eyebrows. Meanwhile, back in present, our dear hero remained a semi-reluctant participant of an experience many a teenage shinobis would have sold their souls for, especially when he felt Haku's attributes pressing against His arm, they were impressive. Pity he didn't savor the moment. Hanabi Hyuga was annoyed beyond words. Why couldn't that blasted Konohamaru simply leave her alone? Heavens only knows why that confounded brat kept on bothering her about every little detail. The whole day was nothing but Hanabi-chan this and Hanabi-chan that. It was enough to drive any normal human mad with frustration. The pale-eyed girl had even contemplated gentle fist the brat back to the Stone Age if that would sufficiently silence his prattle. Unfortunately, being the grandson of the third granted the boy some immunity even from Hanabi. Hanabi wasn't arrogant by any stretch of the word. She, though rarely showing it, respected her father and sister. While Hayashi had constantly berated Hinata, it was Hanabi who ultimately cheered her up every time. The smaller girl knew her sister was not as weak as she had appeared and held back on her most of the time. Hanabi was truly impressed by her sister's gentleness and kindness. Something she had trouble managing. Mind you, she wasn't exactly mean per se, it was simply that Hanabi Hyuga considered herself a no-nonsense kind of girl. She enjoyed stimulating and intelligent conversations and activities. Unfortunately, most of the time she received only the pathetic and idiotic knowledge that might have entertained children half her age. And don't even get her started on boys. Their idea of impressing her seemed to be acts of foolishness and obscurity that Hanabi simply can't condone. More than once she wished to have a friend, heck an associate even, who could judge her not on her age but place her as an equal companion. As of yet she remained horribly disappointed. Hanabi-chan, oh crap, Konohamaru again. Hanabi looked around in panic as she sought an escape route. She'll be damned before she'd have to endure another ear-blistering rant from that unruly urchin. Perfectly aware of the hypocrisy of her thoughts, Hanabi's soft lavender eyes glanced around her. She wasn't quite sure of herself not to lash out if she hears one more oh so endearing call from the devil in boycloth. Hanabi-chan, where are you? Without a second to spare, Hanabi dived under one of the nearby booths of some nameless restaurants. Not a moment too soon, for even as she quickly adjusted the tablecloth to hide her whereabouts, she heard the thud of Konohamaru's feet stopping just a few feet away from her. This is so undignified for a Hyuga. Inside her mind, the 9-year-old girl cried out in indignation, piling more blames on the poor grandson of the third. Holding her breath for fear of discovery, Hanabi could hear the scarf-wearing boy conversing with his cronies. Where is she? Konohamaru? Maybe she went that way. Hanabi could not understand why Konohamaru doesn't hang around Moegi more often. If female companionship is all the boy seeks, then again there was no way in 9 hells Hanabi was going to go within 10 feet of the boy to find out. Major personality changes aside, okay, Udan. Hanabi wasn't sure if he's just born apathetic or if the glasses-wearing boy had ingested something in his youth. She really didn't want to know, for that matter. Finally, when the pitters of feet died into the distance, the girl let out a sigh of relief which froze in her throat when a voice sounded above her, cold and slightly amused. If you have finished your game, would you kindly remove yourself from under my table? Hanabi wished the ground could just split open and swallow her up. Her cheek burned bright red as she tried to hide her embarrassment, to little avail. Sheepishly she climbed clumsily from beneath the table and stood up to face the speaker, dirt staining her white dress. Was I? You don't need to explain yourself. The speaker chuckled softly, though his voice remained just as cool. Hanabi felt her heart skip a beat when she looked up at the man. He was young, no more than a rookie genin, but there was an air of wisdom and experience that she had not seen on other genins before. He was handsome too, more so than her cousin or that Uchiha person, but it was not his face that truly captivated the young girl, although she won't deny her gaze lingered there a tad longer than necessary. It was the boy's eyes. They were deep, bottomless abyss that seemed to hide unfathomable secrets. Hanabi could stare into those indigo pools for an eternity and never discover anything more than what she started off with, if it was possible. Her flush grew even deeper when she realized what she was doing. I'm sorry, Hanabi tried to babble. She may act old on occasions, but deep down she was still just a kid. The stranger smiled and offered her the opposite chair, which she climbed into. It is quite all right, Hanabi-chan, I have taken no offense. How do you know my name? Hanabi's eyes widened in surprise. How had this man known her name? Sure, her eyes were a dead giveaway of her clan, but very few people could have identified her by name. She was not famous, having spent most of her life keeping a low profile. Even the students in her class did not know her too well, most of them referring to her only as that Hyuga girl. The child's eyes narrowed in question as they met the cerulean orbs. Your father speaks of you and your sister often. Another surprise, this kid was acquainted with her father in her memories. Hanabi recalled her father as a cold and callous man who associated only with the most prestigious and influential members of the society, and even then he would not have spoken of his own family matters, something that was akin to taboo for the elder Hyuga head. Who are you? Hanabi did not trust this person. She had no reason to. My name is Uzumaki Naruto, the stranger Naruto answered. Calmly, not at all upset by the sudden alert in her voice. I believe Hayashi-sama mentioned my name before, or am I incorrect in my assumption? Hanabi's eyes opened wide. She remembered now her father speaking something about the boy. It was the day after Hinata had returned from her exam victorious, and her father had gathered both of them in his private study room. Never before had Hanabi seen the man so grim and serious. It was not the same seriousness as when he berated one of them, but a seriousness that concerned major events beyond his control. Listen to me, my daughters, and do not repeat a word of this to anyone. Hayashi had made them take a solemn oath, something he had never done before. If ever something were to happen to the village, you will know what it is. Do not go to me. Find someone called Uzumaki Naruto. Remind him of the agreement. Understand. The words were so cryptic that neither of the Hyuga heiresses understood, but they promised nonetheless, if only to please their father. Yet never did Hanabi dream that she would encounter this Uzumaki Naruto here of all places, sitting in a small and humble eatery. Hi Naruto-san. Hanabi nodded as she tried to meet the man's gaze, which proved to be difficult, not only because of the iciness in the man's eyes, but also because of her seat, which really didn't accommodate her height. But I didn't understand a single word she added to herself. Just then the dishes arrived. The girl was about to turn and leave the boy to enjoy his meal in peace when a plate of what looked like fish was placed in front of her. Naruto looked at her calmly and made an offering gesture. Would you like some? Naruto knew this was one of the girls he would escort if worst come to worst. It might prove easier later on if they could establish an amicable relationship now, which was considerably easier than on a death-ridden battlefield, and he had to concede to Hayashi's observation. The two girls did look rather alike. Hanabi, on the other hand, poked the offered food suspiciously, as though it could suddenly grow legs and pounce before hesitantly taking a bite from the dish. She would like to learn more about this associate of her father's anyway. That was how 1.5 hours later Hanabi found herself back on Hyuga compounds, totally stuffed and blushing. She had finally found the perfect companion, someone who at last understood her need to be treated with respect and equality, someone Hanabi could truly open up to without the feeling of being embarrassed or even dismissed because of her age. All too often did she hear that accursed voice of "oh how cute, that is such an adorable idea," which for once is thankfully absent in the conversation. It was like a gift from God with an almost skip, almost because a Hyuga never skips in her steps. Hanabi entered Hinata's bedroom where the elder Hyuga girl was practicing her calligraphy, something that the girl had a much better grasp at than her father's pathetic attempts. After some good-natured teasing and giggling, Hanabi finally mustered the composure to speak. "Hey listen, Wani-chan, I met this guy earlier." Sakura hummed a little tune as she got ready for the hot spring. It felt so good to relax from the shinobi duties, to just be an ordinary girl. It would seem she was not the only one of the opinion, for several other kunoichis seemed to have had similar ideas. The pink-haired girl had been rather surprised at meeting Ino Tenten at the same dressing room, but she supposed that given the excruciating trials both of them endured, it was only natural that they would want to wash off the wariness. Ninjas they might be, but they were still human. Sakura was still a little nervous around Ino, and so apparently was the platinum-haired girl. While the girls did let out much of their steam during the Chunin exam, it still felt awkward to be next to one another without let out some sort of verbal insult. Of course, as long as the subject stayed away from a certain avenger, the atmosphere between them was decidedly friendlier than before. So sensing the tension in the room, Tenten, who had grew closer to the rookie nines in the past few weeks, spoke up in a rather cheery manner, trying to alleviate the anxieties that still filled the room. "Who do you think would win the Chunin exam?" At this, Sakura almost burst out with her true love's name. Of course, a hastily glance over at Ino forced the words back down her throat. It wouldn't do to cause any more arguments between them, at least for the time being. Instead, she settled into a thinking stance and thought the matter over. Sasuke is a definite choice, having been hailed as a genius on more than one occasion, but it seemed now that Sakura examined the situation with reason rather than blind zeal. There was more than one genius out to contend for the victor. Niji Hyuga was another candidate, a prodigy of the Uchiha's equal, if not better, and then there was Gaara. Sakura could not help but shudder at the madness. She had glanced in the sand. It was not the murderous anger and hatred that had taken over Sasuke at times, but a madness that seemed almost alive. It was madness without reason, insanity without provocation. The boy seemed to enjoy the pain and bloodshed that he inflicts, thrive in the death and violence that surrounded him, and he was powerful beyond imagination. Sakura couldn't even imagine what kind of monster could have walked alive from Lee's catastrophic blows, let alone nearly unscathed. The power of the boy, could he truly be called a boy? Frightened Sakura, "Oi forehead-chan," Ino called out loudly. While their dispute had settled, neither of them truly let go of the name-calling. Of course, by now the nicknames were not as much insulting as they were endearing, a reminder of the strange rivalry between the two girls. Besides, it would feel far too strange and alien otherwise. It was not as though they had given up their feud altogether. "Don't zone out on us." "Oh, I'm sorry." Sakura looked up with a blush on her face, seemingly Realizing where she was, I was just thinking something anyway, that's none of your business, Eno pig. Eno huffed, though much of it seemed an act. Just when she was about to retort, 10-10 butted and come off it. Girls, you can take your fight to the hot spring. Sakura nodded, seeing the reason in the weapon mistress's words. However, even as her hands reached up to undo her one-piece dress, the three kunoichis heard a shrill scream coming from the spring. Although the voice was muffled by the walls of the changing room, the girls could still make out the word pervert. The three genins turned and faced one another, their eyes suddenly alight with an inner fire, one that was no doubt stroked by the sacrilegious P-word. It was debatable whether the female population of the shinobi world had inherited their deep-seated hatred for all things perverse genetically, or whether it was a naturally acquired trait, but one thing was for certain: women hated perverts with a passion. Of course, such enmity was considerably lessened after the Great Pervert Hunt of 1812, when 17 perverts were burned at the stake. However, the disgust never quite left them, so rolling up their sleeves, they were still fully dressed. The three stormed into the steaming spring, hoping to pound whatever bastard to death. They were quite surprised when they found a white-haired man squatting upon what appeared to be an oversized orange toad and facing a very grim-looking Naruto, in whose hand held the longest sword they had ever witnessed on anyone. Never mind the innuendo. Dark blue eyes flashed dangerously. Naruto observed the man before him with a frown. At last he spoke, his voice serene, much like the calm before a storm. Identify yourself. Intruder. The intruder, a man seemingly in his 50s, huffed loudly, his arms crossed at chest level. He seemed to be at about 50 or so, although he carried himself with half that age. Shaggy white hair fell to the small of his back and at front, parted by a unique head protector with the kanji of oil printed across the metallic object. Faye, I don't have to explain myself to brats like you, is that so? Naruto lifted his blade with a slow elegance that seemed more art than combat. What suspicion once troubled his eyes fled like shade before the rising sun. There was nothing in those abysses but a calm understanding and the death that followed. Then, as an intruder, you must be eliminated. Jiraiya of the Sannin grinned widely. He could not wait to teach this overconfident brat a lesson in manners. Perhaps the next time the Gaki wanted to interrupt the great Jiraiya's private moments, he would think twice before acting. Lifting one of his hands in a beckoning manner, he spoke the words slowly and confidently. Come and get me. Famous last words. Jiraiya swore as bolts of fire shot past, missing his precious hair by inches. This was just ridiculous. For the past 3 minutes the child, Jiraiya assumed it to be a child, had pursued the man non-stop across the length of the village, all the while launching various elemental jutsus at the fleeing pervert, demolishing everything and anything caught in his path. The boy, the frog summoner noted, did not require the complicated hand seals that most jutsus required. Rather, the youth seemed to bring forth the blasts of elemental furies with no apparent invocation, without a pause in between. Interesting kid, Jiraiya thought as he made a sharp turn near one of the trees, veering suddenly left in hope of losing his pursuer. Of course, the whole ordeal might be much more interesting if he was not the one fleeing for his life, and certainly his escape would have worked much better if his opponent weren't flying. Jiraiya was not even aware there was a jutsu that allowed you to fly, noting to himself that if he should survive he would record this unique technique. The frog hermit's hands blurred in a series of seals in preparation for a counter-attack. How the hell was he supposed to know the brat would take his words so goddamn seriously? For that matter, how was he supposed to have known the boy, no older than 12, is at the level of a Kage? Certainly Konoha was plentiful in prodigies and gifted shinobis, but this was simply ridiculous. And yet what frightened Jiraiya most was the control the child possesses over such power. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Far too many were the times when men fell prey to power they could not control. It was like giving a child a gun without instructing him in its usage. The child possessed power, but not the mastery that came with it. Such powers are brief, often consuming their wielders rather than their foe, but this blonde was different. He commanded his power with a certainty and confidence that was seen only in the greatest of shinobis. That alone makes him more dangerous by far. Fire release. Fire dragon flame missile. Following the declaration, a bolt of dragon fire shot past Naruto, missing him by mere inches. The air around the boy rippled at the passage of the inferno. At the sight, Jiraiya frowned. He couldn't have missed that jutsu. Should have struck the target head on, not enough to cause serious injuries, but enough to knock the boy unconscious. Unless at the realization, Jiraiya's eyes fell upon the thin ripple that had spread across the airs around the youth, a chakra barrier powerful enough to deflect even a B-ranked jutsu. The Toad Senin's eyes narrowed in thought. Perhaps he should not have held back. Rasengan. Naruto watched on in surprise as a ball of pure mana formed in the palm of the intruder. This was something he had not Seen before something he could actually replicate from this world. It was not created via the many hand seal movements that directed the flow of chakra, but rather formed from a direct manipulation thereof, manipulation that Naruto was all too familiar with. Perhaps this man was not without his use after all. With a smile, Naruto placed both hands around the handle of the blade and waited for the attack. It would be interesting to see the kind of effect it had after all. The amount of mana within that sphere was impressive for a human. He barely dodged the attack as Jiraiya sailed past him. The orb of chakra slammed deep into the ground, creating a massive spiraling crater. Naruto frowned at the display. The attack is powerful, certainly, especially against a singular opponent. Indeed, the power of the technique might threaten even himself, but he could not help but think that something was amiss. The mana was too pure, with no traces of elements within it, and without the elemental attributes, the energy was considerably more stable and less powerful. If elements could be induced into the attack, it would have been truly devastating. Making a mental note to himself, Naruto watched as the man rose to his feet, wiping dirt from his red and silver garment. Damn brat, you're not half bad. The lecherous hermit grinned as he braced himself for the counter-attack. The boy had not resorted to any aggression. So far a good sign. That's the longest anyone held up against me. The great Jiraiya. Naruto raised an eyebrow. Jiraiya of the Sannin. Even though technically the boy was an enemy of unknown origin, Jiraiya couldn't help but puff out his chest with pride at the title. Certainly the Sannin were not what they once had been after Orochimaru's defection and Tsunade's departure, but for most people the word still elicited respect and reverence. That's right, Naruto didn't even bat an eyelash. In that case, the Hokage would like your presence. Seeing the look of annoyance on the man's face, he added, he did not specify the state of health you must be for the encounter. I suggest you comply with his orders willingly. Jiraiya was about to argue, but one look at Naruto, he suddenly recalled how incredibly much he missed the old geezer. Well met, Jiraiya-sama, Naruto said as he offered a hand. Jiraiya scrutinized the boy suspiciously, trying to discern any hidden agenda. The boy sounded sincere enough, although one could never tell with these silent types. Orochimaru had been the same. Of course the hermit did believe that this Uzumaki Naruto was on Konoha's side, at least for the moment. After all, the man doubted that someone with powers that surpassed even a Kage would resort to such means to gain whatever it was that he desired. It seemed terribly foolish when by force one could achieve the same result, and frankly, if Naruto had decided to use force to complete his objective, provided that he had an ulterior objective, Jiraiya didn't think anyone was strong enough to bulk his will. From what he heard, Orochimaru suffered quite a spectacular defeat at the boy's hand. Sure kid, anything I could do to help. Jiraiya shrugged like he told Hokage the main reason he hurried back to the village was not because of Orochimaru but because of the monster attacks that had grown more frequent of late. IWA had already suffered one such siege, and although they walked away victorious, it was a hollow one. IWA was reduced to but a shadow of its former self, and many of its denizens, the ones that survived, are making steady ways towards the other villages, refugees of an alien war. Even now Konoha had received thousands of these poor souls, their lives and homes reduced to ruins beneath the all-consuming shadows. Jiraiya was relieved when he had learned that the Leaf had already prepared for an eventual assault, and shocked when he discovered that the one who had planned the stratagem was none other than the boy who had chased him half the village. And so with some reluctance, he too pledged his strength of the Leaf. Actually, Naruto began surprising the member of the Sannin. I wish to learn more about the technique you employed against me, the Rasengan, I believe it was called. Jiraiya looked down with an appraising look. Truth be told, he had wanted to pass on the technique, but to a worthy person. The Kazama clan was ancient and powerful certainly, but it has produced nothing but idiots this generation, and maybe it was his imagination, but the boy bore a strange resemblance to his late student as well. Now must be his old age setting in. After all, the Yondaime had left behind no heir. Sure, he agreed at last. Perhaps the boy would be the perfect candidate for the Rasengan. For one thing, he will certainly make the spiraling sphere be known if half of what the Hokage had told him about the boy could be confirmed. While I'm at it, do you want to learn how to summon? It was very unusual for Jiraiya to offer this, but he figured that, as long as he is passing on the spiraling sphere, he might as well extend the lineage of Toad summoners as well. To his utter surprise, Naruto shook his head. An intriguing offer, but I must refuse. My own summons are quite sufficient. Jiraiya felt his jaw slacken. This brat had already procured his own summon. Wait, the boy had spoke of summon in plural, which would mean that he had established a contract with more than one entity, but that was impossible. No summon would have consented to share a summoner. No powerful summon. At any rate, well, it's obvious they are not very powerful then, Jiraiya declared loudly, pleased at having reached the logical conclusion. Besides, the boy would have made a fine Toad summoner coupled with his already monstrous abilities. Naruto said nothing. Not very powerful. What a jest. Even Sephiroth dared not Slight the power that resided within the summons of Gaia, summons that Naruto found it possible to call forth in this realm as well. According to his memory, Behemoth, the strongest summon he could command, could level an entire city. Surely the shinobis would consider that powerful, or perhaps the summons of this world possessed even greater strength. Seeing Naruto's doubt, Jiraiya felt it necessary, in teaching the boy a lesson in humility. The child was strong, having surpassed himself even, but the kid sure had poor taste in summons. Well, it would be up to Jiraiya to show the prodigal Gaki that number does not equal to strength. At this time, let us observe a moment of silence for Jiraiya's stupid mistake. That's the brat, Gamabunta asked as he chewed the end of his pipe. He supposed that he'll let this one slide. After all, that kid Jiraiya had picked out certainly had potential. Hell, if the boy would sign the contract, the Toad boss was certain the glory of the Toad clan would soar to ever new heights, provided of course the child was willing. Not bad at all. And here I thought you were utterly useless, pervert. Jiraiya grumbled something about underappreciated artistic views. Well, that's all and good, but the thing is the kid won't sign his name until we prove that Toad is superior to the melange of summon he had made contact with. Oh, is that so? The kid is more talented than you've given him credit for. For the second time in his entire life, Gamabunta found himself impressed by a measly human. While Gamabunta did not like stomping on other summons, Mando was a very different case. He supposed for the good of the family some sacrifices must be made. Not that he's making any sacrifices, mind. Well, I feel like a little exercise anyway. Get out of the way, Jiraiya. Not that I'd complain if you got hurt. Sheesh, show some respect, will you? Jiraiya shook his head and called out to Naruto, who stood on the other side of the empty field ready. When he received an affirmative nod, he gestured to the Toad boss for the battle to begin. So the Hokage turned from his crystal ball to the guest sitting next to him. It was such a pity that he could not display the upcoming battle to a wider audience. He would have made millions. Well, he supposed even with one guest he could still profit a little. Sure, Hokage wasn't supposed to be gambling like this, but his pocket was feeling a little too light for his taste. How do you perceive this fight? Hayashi stared at the scrying sphere intently, studying the images it projected. At last he rose and faced the Hokage, his face calm and confident. Although Jiraiya's skill is nearly unrivaled among shinobis, I am confident that Naruto-kun would emerge victorious. The Hokage chuckled as though having discovered something particularly interesting. My Hayashi, you seem awfully fond of the boy, he teased good-naturedly. One would almost think he was your son. Hayashi cleared his throat uncomfortably. He did not like where this conversation is going. Unfortunately, before he could steer the exchange into safer waters, Sarutobi interrupted him. Or a son-in-law. Hayashi struggled to recall the repercussions that accompanied the assassination of one's own Kage. Must not use gentle fist, must not kill Hokage. Well, since I have confidence in my student as well, why don't we make this a bet? Oh, how the Sandaime savored the sight of Hayashi, trembling all over, beads of sweat rolling down his stoic face in an effort to control himself. Very few individuals were aware of this, but Hayashi Hyuga, the dignified, noble and cold leader of the Hyugas, was in fact a compulsive gambler. His urge in fact rivaled, if not exceeded, that of a certain freakishly strong blonde woman's. Unlike Tsunade, however, Hayashi was able to keep his addiction in check most of the time. The Hokage knew Hayashi was about to give, and he could see it in the man's eyes. Naruto was strong certainly, but in the areas of summons the Hokage agreed with his wandering pupil. Number does not equal strength. Hayashi was a fool to believe otherwise, and soon his foolishness will cost him everything in his wallet. That is now just one more push was needed. I will be willing to throw in my newest copy of Ika Paradise, Sandaime said in a sing-song voice. Did we mention Hayashi also happened to be a closet pervert? Deal. Gamabunta liked his females. He wasn't a pervert, mind you, just a toad with a healthy drive. Of course, the kind of females the boss preferred were females of his own kind. You know, female toads. So when Naruto summoned a scantily clad blue human female onto the battlefield, the giant toad was not amused. Seriously, what the hell did the blonde want to utilize his appeal, then summon a toad? Damn it, of course, if he had wanted to induce nosebleed in Jiraiya, the boy had succeeded beyond his wildest imagination. Gamabunta had no idea that mere nosebleed could propel you through the side of a rock. That was kind of funny actually. Then turning on the calmly waiting woman, he brought his webbed front feet to the hilt of his blade. He hoped this summon would understand it really was nothing personal. However, when he tried to remove the katana from its scabbard, he found he was no longer able, not because he was losing strength, but because the entire length of the blade was frozen shut. The toad boss's eyes widened in surprise. It wasn't just the scabbard that was frozen, the whole place had transformed into a realm of ice and snow. The trees shone a multitude of colors, encased within their icy prisons, and a thick layer of crystal blanketed the earth. Even as Gamabunta watched in amazement and horror, ice slowly advanced upon him, covering his feet and scaling up his legs. With a grunt of effort, the massive toad managed to break free and pulled at his weapon with all his might. The ice shattered, and the blade was loose. With a war cry, the toad bounded towards the Ice Queen. His weapon poised for striking. A wall of ice rose up just as his blade arced through the air. Intercepting the blow, the ice shattered into 1,000 pieces beneath the strike, but the pieces did not fall. They hovered silently in the chilly air and without warning launched themselves upon Gamabunta, who bounded away with a curse. Shiva was a goddess of the darkness and the cold, and she was among her elements this day. On a different field, Gamabunta would have lasted longer, keeping her ice at bay with a few fire techniques he possessed, as well as his blade, but he had sorely underestimated his opponent this time and paid the price, for even as the toad landed, ice shot up from every direction, trapping the summon in a massive cage of frozen crystal, immobilizing the frog boss completely before Gamabunta could break his glacial confines. However, he heard a snap of fingers and a voice spoke somewhere outside the glittering walls. Diamond dust. Even as the voice sounded, Gamabunta's world shattered into a million tiny pieces, incidentally waking up just in time to see your summon getting his toady butt handed to him, even if it was by the sexiest summon of the century, was not a good experience. Jiraiya decided as he fell right back to his dark oblivion again, a piece of the icicle hitting his forehead with remarkable accuracy. Meanwhile, back in the Hokage Tower, a cry of despair was heard for miles.